It's the Awesemo NBA Preseason live before lock show, and a show I'm very excited about because I get to be joined by a new guest, somebody I haven't been on a show with yet. He's the Jalen Horton Tucker of the Awesemo shows. So this is somebody, RynPak here, who maybe isn't on the show all the time, but when he comes in, we know that he could deliver 34 points. He could strip steal the ball from Kawhi Leonard. He could put it up, and he'll win a GPP along the way. So RynPak, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Greg. Excited to be on to talk some NBA preseason, try to maneuver some beat reporter news, and more than anything, I'm excited to join you, talk about this preseason slate. How are you?
Everything is good. And also one thing that I have to mention before we start, guys, do us a favor. Thumbs up on the video, like it, subscribe to the podcast network, also subscribe to the YouTube channel. That helps out our numbers a ton. Also, we have a special promo going on right now at Awesemo. If you use the promo code Caruso as a new Awesemo member, for $1, you can get NBA access through December 29th. This will give you access to everything we're offering for NBA preseason. And then for the first week of the regular season, this will get you access to our projections, ownership projections, Slack chat, lineup builder, and much more. So go check that out. It's only $1, promo code Caruso. And that is a great value if you're just trying to dip your toes into NBA DFS. Maybe you want to try out the Awesemo product. It's only $1. You like it, great. You sign up for the rest of the season. If not, you didn't really lose anything. You only risked $1. So let's dive into the first part of these games here. The first game on the slate, the Toronto Raptors taking on the Charlotte Hornets. We'll start with the Raptors side. We do have a starting lineup for them. That is Fred VanVleet, Norman Powell, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Aaron Baines, and the only player we know that is out is going to be Kyle Lowry. He's yet to play in the preseason. So, Ryan, what do you make of the Raptors? And then one thing I'll say also before we actually get into this, now that we've seen teams play, a game, all the teams on the slate except for the Pelicans and the Heat, how much weight are you putting into the first games that we saw from these teams?
So this is the preseason. I tend not to put in much weight. I'd like to see how the younger players are looking more or less, and try to see what their feel is. And not to say to judge them on their first game. Sometimes you can see if the player has the it factor in them with these young players. So that's what I tend to look in the first games. But other than that, I don't really tend much to let it influence my decisions. And the one thing about this year, what we were talking beforehand, all the teams are playing each other for the second time due to the COVID-19 restrictions. So that's kind of nice. I had tuned in to a couple of the first games to see how these players would match up with each other. To go back to the point of the Toronto starting lineup, it's something that Nick Nurse said pregame was he's going to stick to what he did the first game, which is nice. And he's not going to let the vets play into the second half or the starters play in the second half. I'm going to have to take a look at the news specifically. But we saw the younger guys get some more extra run in the likes of Chris Boucher, who's going to be interesting, and Malachi Flynn, who are the two Raptors that are standing out to me right now. Additionally, they have some younger players who might get some additional run. Three-time world champion Patnaik might make an appearance. O'Shea Brissett. The two favorite Raptors for me right now would be Flynn and Chris Boucher. We know how Chris Boucher's upside, what it could be. He started up slow in that first game, so I expect him to perform better. Maybe the recency bias on him might keep his ownership a little down, but the NBA field has been a little sharper this preseason than in years past. What are your thoughts on the Raptors? Are you also on Flynn and Boucher?
Yeah, so I'll start with this because I was kind of a little bit of a leading question when I asked you, what do you make of the first games? Because to me, I'm not necessarily looking at the performances, right? I'm not looking like, oh my God, this guy scored 20 points, therefore he's a lock for the second slate. I'm not really looking at it from that angle. What I am looking at it from is what are the minutes, right? Who are guys playing with for a couple reasons. Number one, how many minutes can we expect guys to be on the court? And number two, who are they actually playing with? Because what that could be telling of is if we have a guy who is maybe a higher usage player that's playing in rotations with a lot of lower usage players, then I think it's a situation where we could expect hey, this guy is probably going to be somebody who takes, 8 to 10 shots during his time on the court. So that's really the angle that I'm looking at it from. So somebody like Chris Boucher, you mentioned, I think it helps him a lot that he's playing with the second unit as opposed to starting and playing alongside, Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam, because with him coming off the bench, there's a better chance of him getting some of that usage that maybe he wouldn't have gotten if he was in the starting unit. So that's why, to me, Chris Boucher is the priority play from the Raptors side of the game. To your point on Malachi Flynn, I think that he's viable, but maybe not necessarily my favorite target on the slate. The guy that I'm definitely looking at it from the Raptors is going to be Chris Boucher. Is there anybody else that interests you here?
Yeah, it's going to be nice to look into that Raptors front court. I'm taking a look at their depth chart right now. Outside of Boucher, maybe one other front court Raptors member might be good. It's tough with these preseason, but I feel the most confident in Boucher with his minutes. Like you said, minutes are the most important thing in NBA in general, and especially in preseason. And I think Boucher could crack mid-20s in minutes. And you were telling me mid-20s of minutes in Chris Boucher. If you look up his G League numbers, they're through the roof, and he's performed at a good rate in the NBA as well in his games that he's appeared in. It would be Boucher for me, but that's where I stand with the Raptors right now.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think this is a team that I have all that much interest in. The other thing too is, I mean, if you look at their minutes from the first game, which is something that I said that is the one thing that I'm really putting a lot of weight into, and as you mentioned, that the idea that Nick Nurse said is he wants to keep the rotation about the same from the first game, is they went pretty deep and played everybody, like 16 to 20-ish minutes. The guy who led the team in minutes was Matt Thomas. He played 21 minutes. So without anybody getting extended run, like this isn't a Thibodeau rotation by any means. He's the one guy who's taking the preseason seriously in true Tibbs form and was playing Knicks guys, 30 minutes right off the bat in preseason games. With the Raptors playing a pretty deep bench and nobody being all that cheap in the starting lineup, I think this is one of the weaker teams to target. Moving on to the Hornets side of the game, they are starting Devontae Graham, Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, PJ Washington, and Cody Zeller. We don't have any significant players ruled out. I think the most notable thing here is that LaMelo Ball coming off the bench again. And I'm kind of curious what you think of LaMelo Ball overall, because to me, and like I said, not putting all that much weight into the first game, but also what we've seen from him overseas in Australia, he kind of seems to me like fancier version of Lonzo Ball, if that makes sense. Their games are very similar, right? I think they're going to fill up the box score in a very similar way, where it's going to be probably inefficient shooting, not a whole lot of scoring, a lot of rebounds, a lot of assists. I actually think his game plays fairly well for a preseason type exhibition game, just the way that he likes to run the court. He's good in the open floor and on the fast break. So I think he is somebody that we could probably count on to be a pretty good permanent fantasy producer this year. He's probably going to be a little inconsistent, but he's also not going to go, 0 for 8 from the field or whatever it was in his first start. So I think there's a little room for positive regression there. LaMelo Ball is probably the player that stands out the most to me from the Hornets side of the game. How about for you?
So we had gotten news from Borrego. He's going to go up to 22 to 25 minutes for those starters. And I don't think LaMelo Ball will lose too many of those minutes because of that. And going back to your question about LaMelo Ball, I mean, we've been hearing about LaMelo Ball since he was a freshman at Chino Hills, and he was lighting it up there, and he's lived up to the hype. I've got to give him that. LeVar has made sure LaMelo's lived up to the hype. I'm very excited to see how his game translates. I do think Alonzo is a much superior defender compared to LaMelo Ball at this stage in their careers, but I do think LaMelo Ball, I hope Borrego is not one of those strict coaches where he's going to bench LaMelo for being too fancy, like you said. But I do think his game translates well for a fantasy purposes. I think he won't be like a one stat type of category. I think he'll fill up the box sheet in different ways. In terms of DFS today, I'm not that interested in LaMelo Ball right now, based off what I'm looking into. I think I would prefer potentially taking my chances with Devontae Graham or Gordon Hayward if they're going to get 25 minutes today over LaMelo Ball. I think maybe defenses are attacking LaMelo Ball in terms of like playing harder, just because that's kind of what they did to Lonzo when he first came to the league. They were trying to bully him around. If you remember that first game, what Pat Bev did to Lonzo. Not saying LaMelo Ball is going to get that sort of attention, but I'm not that interested today. But he played all right. He got 10 rebounds last game, and I think he'll get more points. So I think he's a fine option, but it's not someone who I'm overly too excited about today.
That's fair. I think if I had to make a counterpoint, this is what it would be. The Raptors have one of the best defenses in the NBA. Except if you look at who he's going to be playing against on the bench, he's not playing against the Fred VanVleets. He's not playing against, Pascal Siakam, that unit. The starters are going to draw a much tougher matchup for the Hornets from the Hornets in this spot. They're going to be playing against the Raptors starting unit, where Lonzo Ball is mostly going to be playing against second and third stringers. So to me, I look at that matchup, I think it's a little more favorable. Now, with that said, against those backups in the first game, he did go 0 for from the field and scored 0 points. But even so, he scored over a fantasy point per minute because of the 10 rebounds and 4 assists. So that's really where I'd lean on him as a decent option. Definitely not a priority for me on this slate, but he's somebody that I have some interest in. Overall, though, I don't necessarily think this is the best game to target as a whole. The thing that makes it a little tricky with this slate, as we're talking about it now, is we don't have that much information on the later games. We don't know who's starting. We don't know who some of those cheaper values are going to be. But at first glance, it seems like it's not going to be from this game. But one thing that we could see happen is that since there is not information yet on the later games, people might go into lock and just say, hey, I'm going to set my lineup now. I'm going to roster the guys who I know are starting from the Hornets or the Raptors or the Heat or something like that. And I think that could create a little bit of leverage by playing the later guys. And the other thing too is with 5 games in late swap, you could always put some of those guys in the utility forward guard slot and give yourself a lot of flexibility and make some lineup switches as we get more lineup information.
Yeah, and as we move to another game where we do have a coach talk about certain minutes that starters are going to play, where I think it's going to draw quite a bit of ownership, I believe they start at the same time, the Pelicans game. And what I've seen in the first slate, not many people late swapped, and I personally got burned in a personal late swap I did. I chose to play West Coast Kevin Knox over Taylor and Horton Tucker, where I thought Kuzma would hit that upside. And he didn't. So late swap is very, very key in NBA, even in preseason, and people are just not doing it. So there's always that edge there. And if we get more certainty on what Minnesota or Memphis are doing, or what Milwaukee and Dallas are doing, where there's 2 big studs there is a huge leverage spot, like you said. So news is everything. Pay attention to our Slack chat, where News God is breaking down all the news for us. And we have Josh in there, and we have a bunch of our NBA analysts in there talking there. Me and Greg will be in there just monitoring news. And that alone is worth $1 to sign up for Caruso. So make sure to check that out.
That is a good segue to get into that plug there. So yes, that is $1 for the promo code Caruso, and you get NBA access through December 29th for everything we're offering. That includes the first week of the regular season, but it is only good for new customers. The other thing to pay attention to is the YouTube chat, because they're all loving your backdrop right now, RynPak. They've got all kinds of questions about your favorite alcohols, what's in those bottles back there. Are those empty or are they full? They want to know how much of it you've been drinking.
There's some empty ones lying around somewhere when when you pick Kuzma over Taylor and Horton Tucker. But outside of that, I mean, I had to go contrarian with the backdrop. I've seen people have just plain one. I was like, I'll switch it up today, coming back on the stream. So yeah, my favorite alcohol is somewhere around here. Maybe if this video gets 200 likes, maybe we'll pour some up before we hand it over to the NFL
All right,
guys.
There we go. By the way, that is not a high mark. We're already at 81 likes. We've got 663 people watching. So guys, do us a favor. Like the video. Let's get RynPak to drink a little bit on the show. He's already laid down the gauntlet. He's put the mark down, and he way undersold us. He only put it at 200. We could get that number in like 30 seconds. You could have shot higher, done a little bit more. Look, he's already sweating. He's getting nervous. He knows what's coming to him. 123 likes now. That took 5 seconds. You're in trouble, man. You're in trouble.
I'm definitely in trouble. Maybe I'm gonna have to pull an audible. Let's hit. There's 663. 300 I'll definitely get up and try to deviate from that and pour something up. Let's I had to pull the audible. 300.
All right, 300. Well, the 200 were basically already almost there. 174 likes. People in the chat say they're going to be drinking with you too. So we're going to have an interesting show, because as if we didn't already get some bizarre comments and questions in the YouTube chat, now we're going to get everybody drinking with us as we do the show also. So we could get a little bit off the rails, but 6:45 till we get off and pass it over to the live before lock for football. So guys, give us the thumbs up so we could get there. Let's get to the next game on the slate, the Miami Heat versus the New Orleans Pelicans. And this is a game that we don't have any information on in terms of what's already happened in the preseason, because both of these teams are playing their first game. Neither of them have played a game yet. We do have a starting lineup for the Heat, and we have some key players who are out. So for Miami, they're starting Kendrick Nunn, your favorite player, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Mo Harkless, and Bam Adebayo. Jimmy Butler, Goran Dragic, and Andre Iguodala are all out. So with that in mind, how much do you like Tyler Hero now? Because I know that you said before he might not be your favorite player in the NBA.
He might not be, and I got to give him credit. He lives his life better than any NBA player I've seen in recent memory, and I'm all for it. And especially if Jack Harlow is dropping a whole title based off a basketball player who just went off in the bubble, I got to give him some credit. But today, he's young. He's a second-year player, and Spo said he's going to play his young guys. And I'm going to like Nunn and Hero. I'm going to backtrack a little bit what he said, but I'm a little cautious with Tyler Hero because he's kind of a proven product. They already kind of know where he fits in on the team. And same with Nunn. He started a bunch of games last year. He was great throughout the regular season, and then got COVID. I think he had some conditioning issues down the stretch. And also with Bam, those three guys, I like them if they're going to get run. I just don't know what Spo is going to do in the preseason today with those three guys. But if you're telling me we're getting 24 minutes of those three guys, I'm going to like them quite a bit. but we just don't know what ends up happening. But outside of that, I know they have some young guys in Chris Silva, Kyle Alexander, Gabe Vincent, and I believe they're rookie and Precious. Pardon me, I don't know how to say his last name, but Precious is what I'm going to go by.
I butchered so many names yesterday, especially the European rookies. I was so far off, and the YouTube chat was not having it yesterday. But it's no big deal. I do agree with you on one major point, though. I think that Kendrick Nunn's a pretty strong play here. Another thing too, Kendrick Nunn, a player you had success with in the playoffs. So I remember that was maybe the biggest showdown win that you had was on FanDuel, where you rostered Kendrick Nunn at very low ownership. So maybe RynPak has he's the Kendrick Nunn whisperer.
Yeah, I like Kendrick Nunn. I'm gonna like him, especially I believe he'll have the lead ball handling role today. And in this matchup against New Orleans, I don't know what Stan Van Gundy is going to do with pace with New Orleans compared to last year. I'm sure he's going to tone it down just a tad. They were, I believe, one of the faster teams last year. But I'm going to like that. I feel like that game's going to move. And I'm going to like Kendrick Nunn if he's going to get those 24 minutes. I'm going to be willing to take some risks with the Miami young guys here because Spo said he's going to take those young guys. And we know Butler, Iguodala, and Dragic are not playing today. So that's some certainty that the minutes are going to be there. I just don't know how much. I don't think they're going to. I think 24 seems like their cap. What's your opinion on the ceiling of these Heat minutes today?
Yeah, it's a little hard to say just because this, like I said, this is their first game of the preseason. So just going off what we've seen from other teams and their starting units, I think that probably 22-ish minutes is about what we're going to see. And just the sample size I'm going off here is not the Heat themselves, but what we saw other teams do in their first preseason games. That was about the standard for starters. So I think it's reasonable to expect that. And then you look at the price tags of the players. I think that Kendrick Nunn is the one that stands out the most. Bam Adebayo at 7,400, I don't think is a bad pay-up option because he's a guy who is a really good permanent fantasy producer and is not somebody really paying a premium to get up to. The one thing I'll say, though, is the priority is definitely for me to roster Luka Doncic and Giannis Antetokounmpo on this slate. So I wouldn't necessarily be playing Bam Adebayo in a cash lineup if you're playing cash for preseason. But I think as a tertiary star, I think Adebayo would be the next guy I go to after Luka and Giannis.
Yeah, and definitely these guys can go off in 24 minutes. Someone could get 40 fantasy points. It's unlikely, but it can definitely happen if they're going to get 24 minutes. And Bam is someone who fills up the stat sheet in multiple ways. And arguably one of the best playoff blocks ever, what he did to Jason Tatum in the conference finals last year. I had to get that in there.
All right, guys, we are at 212 likes. So you know what that means? That means 88 more likes. Oh, and they're already going up. 80 likes, and RynPak will take a drink on the show, and then he'll answer your questions, which is really what we're looking for. Because if you didn't think that NBA preseason content was good enough as is, or isn't easy enough to predict, if it wasn't already, something with a lot of variance, imagine RynPak trying to figure out minutes after he's had a drink on the show. That we're gonna add a whole new wrinkle into the program.
Yeah, and speaking of minutes, I think we should transition to some certainty in minutes in the new head coach of the Pelicans and Stan Van Gundy. Unless if you want to talk about other Heat players in Harkless and Duncan Robinson by any chance.
Not really. I don't think those are guys I have much interest in. Mo Harkless in particular, not a guy who's a really good permanent fantasy producer, well under fantasy point per minute, and probably isn't going to be playing significant minutes. And then he's another guy who I talked about with some of the starters in the Raptors game. Is it hurts him that he's playing with the starters because when you're with Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, Kendrick Nunn, guys who are willing to use up some of that usage, it's just hard to imagine that Mo Harkless is going to take many shots.
And I agree with you. And Duncan Robinson, who went to Michigan when I was there, can definitely shoot the three. And if you think he's going to have a 7 to 8 3-pointer mid-game, feel free to take a shot or here or there. But unlikely. He just shoots threes. He really doesn't do much else. He's a liability in defense. Preseason defense really doesn't matter, but he has that minor upside in him.
All right, so let's get over to the Pelicans side of the game. We don't have an official starting lineup for them yet. The one thing we do know is that Steven Adams is questionable to play. Players who are out, Eric Bledsoe, Wenyen Gabriel, and JJ Redick. So there are some core players who are not going to be available. The other guys who I think are probably likely to start are going to be Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, Josh Hart, and Lonzo Ball. So you talked about minute security here. So what is it that you really think is secure about the playing time?
I hope Stan Van Gundy is not a pathological liar because he said he expects those starters to play around 30 minutes. And now it's kind of nice that they have a questionable starter in Steven Adams. Now, if Steven Adams were to play, I think his ownership is going to be very low, and 30 minutes of Steven Adams on this slate will be very nice. Now, if he doesn't play, I expect Jackson Hayes to get those minutes. But everyone else looks phenomenal if they're all going to get close to 30 minutes, in my opinion. I like Lonzo. I like Zion. I like Brandon Ingram. Josh Hart's going to play. I know JJ Redick didn't make the trip, and I believe Eric Bledsoe didn't make the trip to where they're playing to Miami as well. So, and I believe Stan Van Gundy. I need to make sure he's not. I feel like he's going to limit that rotation. I believe they only have 2 preseason games as well. So it's important to know when these teams are like a few preseason games. I feel like they might be Stan Van Gundy, who has shown hit in the past to run out his preseason minutes quite a bit. 2 years ago, he played Andre Drummond 30-plus minutes and some other starters 30-plus minutes. So he's done this in the past, and it wouldn't shock me if they get, at least 3 rotations, if not that 4th rotation tonight. And if you're going to tell me you're going to play 3 Pelicans in your lineup today, I'd say go for it, because sometimes in preseason, people tend to get too cute, and I think 3 Pelicans is safe, and it's not too cute, in my opinion. What's your opinion on having 3 Pelicans in your lineup, and overall, do you have a preference in Pelicans tonight?
Yeah, so I think the guy for me is Zion Williamson. I mean, if we look at somebody who's going to be a per-minute fantasy producer, Zion, who produced, fairly well overall last year, he averaged, what was it in terms of fantasy points per game, 34 and a half. And it's not like he was playing all that many minutes anyway, right? So if we think that we're going to get 25, 26 minutes from Zion, that's about what he was playing last year anyway, with all the rest and shortened rotations that he played. So I think that Zion at 6,300 in the mid-range is one of these stronger plays on this slate. He's definitely somebody that I want to target. In terms of the other guys, Brandon Ingram, I think, is fair. I don't know if I want to pay up 7,600 for him. Lonzo Ball at 6,900 is also pretty expensive. So the 2 guys that I'm prioritizing the most are going to be Josh Hart and Zion Williamson. To your point on Steven Adams, yes on him if he's starting, obviously. If he's out, then I agree with you. I think that Jackson Hayes is definitely somebody to take a look at. And the other thing with Hayes also, he's another guy who, when he was on the court, we saw pretty good per-minute fantasy upside from him. And at only 4,800, if he's going to start at center and play 26, 27 minutes, something like that, then yeah, I definitely think he's one of the better plays on the slate.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. Jackson Hayes just has a tendency, he's like, can't keep his hands to himself, the case of Marquise Chris, where they just foul at a rapid rate. Outside of, I think my favorite Pelican might be Brandon Ingram today, just because I'm not sure what Zion's conditioning looks like. I haven't read much into camp notes, but I'm sure it's fine. Just in case, like, he's their future of their franchise, just in case if a tweak happens there, I see no reason to risk it. But that goes for everyone else as well. So, but I do like Brandon Ingram. He seems the most safe out of the Pelicans. But to be honest, I like them all. People are asking in the YouTube chat for Pelicans. Yeah, they go for it. I don't think many people will play 4. I wouldn't play 4 Pelicans probably on FanDuel. Just because it's on FanDuel, their salary is irrelevant and it's just raw points. It'd be really hard for me to play 4 Pelicans. It could happen if Van Gundy decides to play them 30-plus minutes, but I don't see him cracking that 30-minute mark. But that risk is completely fine with me, and I don't think it's that big of a risk. But for me, it'd be Ingram, then Zion, and then I would probably keep Lonzo, and then if Adams plays, I'm going to hopefully Adams comes in at a lower ownership where I'd be willing to get way over the field on that.
And I think that we got a good question in the YouTube chat that will definitely be able to segue us to the next game, because we have the news god himself is asking us who is our favorite play on the slate, irregardless of price. So salary was not an issue, which it isn't on FanDuel. You can play whoever you want. Who would be your guy? And to me, that's going to be Giannis. I think that's a pretty easy question to answer. And that is the next game on the slate, the Milwaukee Bucks against the Dallas Mavericks. So in the last game, it's not that we saw Giannis play a ton of minutes, but, he played over 20, which is pretty substantial for in terms as far as preseason goes. And he's such a good per-minute fantasy producer. A guy was averaging right around 2 fantasy points per minute last year. I mean, if you're going to get 24, 25 minutes from Giannis, we're probably going to expect around 50 fantasy points from him. And that just puts him at by far the highest expected output of any player on the slate. I don't make actual projections for preseason. I just think it's really hard to predict rotations and all that. But if I was, Giannis would by far be the guy who comes out with the highest baseline projection.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you there. Giannis for me would be my top raw scoring points in play. And it'd be tough for me to fade him on FanDuel. And I would I wouldn't advocate a lock in preseason, but Giannis is almost right there. So I like Giannis quite a bit. I couldn't have said it any better than you have.
Yeah, and I'll say this: if you were playing cash games though for preseason, that in that situation, I'd call Giannis a lock. I think that in GPPs, it's pretty hard to call anybody a lock at any point in time. But Giannis, as far as cash games go, he'd be the first guy I lock in, and then you try to figure out the value situation around him. As for some of the other guys in the starting lineup, at least last game, it was Drew Holiday, Dante DiVincenzo, who is expected to open the season as the starting shooting guard, Chris Middleton, and Brook Lopez. Here's the one issue I have with DiVincenzo, even though he has a reasonable price tag. He's playing with guys who are such high usage players in Chris Middleton, Giannis, Holiday, even Lopez to an extent, that it's hard to expect him to get a whole lot of looks at shots in that starting lineup. I actually would have preferred DiVincenzo coming off the bench from a fantasy standpoint. Any of these other peripheral players on the Bucks that stand out to you?
Peripheral players on the Bucks, it's so hard for me to just pick one of those Bucks who are going to be good. Middleton could get there, but I'm just going to try to make sure to get as much Giannis in there. I do think another peripheral Bucks player will be good, but to say I have confidence in another one and say who it can be, I'd like to take my chances on like some lower owned players, maybe DiVincenzo potentially, but it's just I like Giannis so much. I'll find it difficult. Maybe bench players on the Bucks. I know Bobby Portis played decently well last time and got some minutes, but I'm not too inclined on another Bucks player. I'd probably prefer Middleton, but just because he has an upside in him. But that's about it for me. I don't feel too confident outside of Giannis.
Yeah, so pulling up some of those minutes there, to your point, Bobby Portis did play 20 minutes last game. If I want to go to a cheaper bench guy who I think could take some usage, even though he did not play particularly well in the first game, DJ Augustine got 19 and a half minutes off the bench last game. And I mean, you're talking about a proven NBA player coming off the bench. If he's going to get around 20 minutes again, he's somebody who we've seen have big fantasy games in the past. He also doesn't have that much of a price tag. He is only, where'd it go? I just added up here. I think it was 40. No, I can't find the price, but he was in the 4,000 range, and just getting that kind of price on 4,100, so nearly min price on DJ Augustine. Getting that kind of price on a veteran player who knows a decent fantasy producer that's going to be getting around 20 minutes, I think that he makes for a good value play. He's the guy off the bench that stands out the most to me for the Bucks.
That makes sense. Yeah, I like the Augustine pickup for them. I think he'll play a solid role through them throughout the season. It's a solid backup, and he's proven himself as a veteran. I do think there's better players in terms of spiking in upside than DJ Augustine tonight. I think like maybe I would rather play potentially Nickeil Alexander-Walker of the Pelicans. That's someone who I think can just, when he gets like the fourth quarter run, I think he's going to be their lead usage player. So I prefer him to Augustine. And I think there's enough value on the slate where you can jam in both Luka and Giannis. That's what it's currently looking like for me. Is that how you feel about the slate as well?
Yeah, and I saw some people asking questions is how could you trust Luka after he only played 16 minutes last game? And the reality is I don't really know how many minutes anybody's going to play for preseason. I assume that he's going to get a little bit more extended minutes. But the other thing to consider too is that Luka is such a good fantasy producer. Let's say he gets a little bit more minutes. We know he's not going backwards, right? He's not going to end up playing 14 minutes or something like that. So let's assume around 20 minutes for Luka Doncic. In 20 minutes, you expect around 30 fantasy points from him. And the thing about getting 30 fantasy points from any player or just any of these stud players that have such a high floor is that there's enough value on these preseason slates that you just have these other 4K guys, like say Nickeil Alexander-Walker, maybe a DJ Augustine, where you could plug these guys in. And if you could get, 15 fantasy points from those guys, then then getting the safety fantasy points from the high end guys that we know are going to get minutes and produce around the court, that's usually going to be the recipe to a winning lineup. Like take, for example, the first slate of the preseason. Trae Young was in the GPP winning lineup. He was very popular. He was 8,700. He only scored 25 fantasy points. And so people were like, Trae Young sucked. And yeah, to an extent, he kind of did, but it didn't matter because those 25 fantasy points are still really valuable when it's really hard to know where the fantasy production is coming from basically anybody else.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And it's tough. I mean, it really all boils down to your risk tolerance. And if you're playing cash games, there's no reason to get really too risky with these preseason choices. Now, if you're playing GVPs, you want to take a few shots on some random guys who you think will somehow get an extra few minutes while the field doesn't. Take your shot. And I think preseason is where you can jump the field the easiest because of just how populated some of the ownership percentages are. Like, for example, going back to that Trae Young thing, I think you could have easily pivoted to, I think, Lillard, where people were like, oh, Lillard's not going to play 25 minutes. And then right before lock, where people have already used up their point guard and guard eligible spots, Lillard, stats came out, yeah, they're going to play 20 to 25 minutes. And that, like, I think it was like a fifth of the ownership Lillard compared to Trae Young that night. And there you go. That's how you jump the field and take advantage of these preseason contests, because the ownership will be a lot more sharper come NBA regular season time, which is about 8 days away now, which is exciting. But right now, the field really doesn't know. And I feel like if you have an edge, your personal edge, feel free to implement that and take your chance there.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of taking shots, we were at 282 likes on the video, so 18 more. And RynPak will take a shot on the video, and that'll be how we could close out the show. Next game on the slate, we have the Memphis Grizzlies playing against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And this is where it starts to get pretty tricky in some of these later games, because we really don't have much information in terms of injury reports or starting lineups. For the Timberwolves, at least last game, they started D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, Josh Okogie, Jake Layman, and Karl Anthony Towns. All the starters played 20 to 21 minutes. It's hard for me to really like any of these guys, because I think 21 minutes for Cat, like, I think that's fine, but I'd rather roster Luka Doncic or Giannis in that same price range at 21 minutes for him. And the other thing to consider too is for those peripheral guys, Russell and Towns are both really high usage players. And then Malik Beasley in his own right is a fairly high usage player. So it makes it hard to expect much production from the other starters outside of Russell and Towns. Then if we get into some of the bench guys, Anthony Edwards, I think, is somewhat interesting. He led the team in minutes, playing 26 minutes in that game. Rookie, first overall pick in the NBA draft. They're looking to get him run in the preseason. So I think that he's the guy that stands out the most to me, is going to be Anthony Edwards as a value play coming off the bench because of the workload he played in the first game.
Yeah, Anthony Edwards, I feel like I'm indifferent. I have no strong take on what his NBA outlook looks like. I haven't watched enough tape of him. I like that he played 26 minutes last game. I'll tell you that. Yeah. And if he's going to get 26 minutes again, maybe he feels a little bit more comfortable and does a better job. I think obviously, like, you're playing with big usage guys, and Russell and Cat will be tough. The Minnesota's a little tough. I think I'll be willing to take a few chances with Cat tonight, because he can get that upside. I mean, he gets going a little bit and maybe does a little better. But then again, there are just so many options that are safer, and I feel more confident in tonight than the Minnesota side of things.
All right, and big news. We did get over the 300 like mark, so I'm going to start talking about the next game. You pour yourself a drink while I kill some time. Is this going to mess up your setup or anything like that? Are you already drinking, or is that water in the cup?
That's water in the cup. I'll pour something.
You should have lied and just said it was something else. But like, I've been drinking the whole time. That would have been the real twist to the show. From the Memphis Grizzlies side of the game, once again, no starting lineup. The players who were ruled out, we have Jaren Jackson Jr. He's coming off knee surgery. We have Justice Winslow, who's basically been out for almost every game over the last 2 years, so nothing new going on there. And then game time decisions, we have Brandon Clark. He missed the last game. Starting lineup for the first preseason game for the Memphis Grizzlies, they went with Ja Morant, Grayson Allen, Dylan Brooks, Kyle Anderson, and Jonas Valanciunas. For me, I think one of the players that I feel somewhat comfortable saying is a fade for me is going to be Ja Morant. And the reason being, he's 8,800. He's coming off of a very, very strong preseason game. He's had one of the best games we've seen so far in the preseason. But considering the price range, you have to think to yourself, Morant at 8,800, who's the better fantasy producer, him or Giannis? Who's the better fantasy producer, Morant or Doncic? And to me, it's going to be Doncic and Giannis. These guys are all in the same price range. And I still think that Morant's ownership could be driven up a little bit based on what he did in his first game of the preseason, where he just went nuts. So I think there's a little bit of recency bias towards Morant. For me, I think that he's somebody to fade in GPPs in favor of Luka Doncic and Giannis. Do you have any Morant takes?
Yeah, and I think his ownership's gonna skyrocket purely because of recency bias tonight, and that's something to be. I'm more willing to zig while people zag, or whatever you want to call it here, and I'm going to be kind of making sure to be a little under the field on Morant just because of recency bias, and maybe take my chances with Lonzo or maybe a Rozier or a Graham, and hoping that Morant doesn't do as well. That's my personal take, but I understand if you feel comfortable with Morant, and I would rather just try to find that salary to get up to Giannis and Luka, and hopefully those guys carry me there, and then trying to rely on Morant to do what he did again. Just trying to like jump the field through recency bias, but also just keep an eye on news. And news is everything. Let's say the coaches come out and say they're going to limit minutes this time around, and that could change everything. So like whatever we just said could mean nothing about an hour from now. So keep an eye on the news, be in that Slack chat, and just be notified and make your adjustments, make those informed decisions. And I think you'll be just fine tonight on tonight's slate. It is a weird slate, just like any preseason slate, but the news will help you guide you there. And then organically your lineups will be built through like the certainty of news.
For sure. And there actually are a couple of bench players that I think make sense from the Grizzlies because they played Desmond Bane 22 minutes last game. They played John Contra. They played him 21 minutes. They played Melton 20 minutes. And I like Melton. I think Melton's a pretty good fantasy producer. He's somebody who was very hit and miss as a value play last year in NBA DFS, where there was sometimes that Melton was chalk and he would do nothing in 20 minutes. Then there'd be other games where Melton would come off the bench. He'd play like 18 minutes. He'd get 6 steals or something like that and end up scoring 30 fantasy points. So I look at Melton, and I think a lot of these bench guys just don't really generally draw much attention in the preseason DFS. But Melton at 4,900, I think he is upside. I think that Bane at 4,600, there's a little bit of upside considering that he played over 20 minutes last game. Are there any of these bench guys that stand out to you that you want to roster?
Yeah, I just want to hop in here and just say Steven Adams will be starting.
Nice.
The news, according to the Pelicans Twitter account. And with that being said, I like Steven Adams quite a bit if he's going to get the aforementioned Stan Van Gundy close to 30 minutes run. And I'm just fingers crossed. I hope he's not lying to all of us today. But outside of that, out of the bench players, a bench player who was on last time was Xavier Tillman. A guy a lot of people who were very high character player out of Michigan State, someone who I watched who played in the Big Ten. And I was disappointed he didn't start last time, and I got burned by just like sticking with it and not lead swapping off of that. But bench players, like you said, Melton is someone who I like. The minutes seem to be like not given kind of spread out where I don't really like it that much. And like Conchar is someone who you mentioned. I just not trying to get too cute with those Memphis bench players. I feel more certainty targeting the Pelicans bench and potentially a guy like LaMelo Ball and maybe like a Bobby Portis on the Bucks side of things. Guys who I know have shown an upside in the past, and I do think their ownership will be low enough where that upside should be enough to potentially give me a top 0.1% outcome in GBPs tonight.
All right, final game on the slate, and while I'm breaking down, I think it's time for you to pour yourself a drink. I think we've reached that time of the program. All right, good. So we've got the, and by the way, everybody in the chat says they're drinking with you. So we've got that going on the YouTube chat too. We've got a whole party going on. What's more exciting than NBA preseason DFS? We've got people drinking. We've got the chat partying. This is the place to be. NBA preseason. Everybody's excited for the NBA season to start. Last game on the slate, which I actually think is probably the least interesting for DFS purposes. All we really have is we've got RynPak taking a drink. That's the best part of the last game on the slate. The Utah Jazz taking on the Phoenix Suns. No starting lineups here. Guys that are not expected to play from the Jazz side of the game. Shaq Harrison. From the Suns side of the game, Cameron Johnson and Dario Saric. For the Suns, it's hard to expect the guys like Jay Crowder, Chris Paul, the veterans that are going to be playing a whole lot of minutes in this game. And then you've also got, pretty high usage guys alongside them. DeAndre Ayton, Devin Booker also in the lineup. I don't really see a whole lot I like from the Suns. I'd much rather target some of those earlier games, the Pelicans game in particular. Do you feel any differently there?
So we know no Sarge, no Cam Johnson, no Campaign, and CP3 will play, like you said. This comes down to like this, what your risk tolerance is. If you are willing to be very risky, there will be a Sun who's good. To say that I know which one will be good, I will be completely lying to you. But I'm willing to take shots with potentially Javon Carter. Okay. Someone who had some very strong bubble games. He's an excellent defender. I believe he won Defensive Player of the Year in college before he came in. Memphis kind of gave him away to Phoenix. I forget what happened, where Phoenix just got him. But that's someone who I'm willing to take a shot with. Maybe he gets some ball handling duty. But it's very risky across the board here. Monty Williams hasn't really inclined on what the minutes will look like with Chris Paul today. Something to pay attention there. But Chris Paul has an upside. If he's getting 20 minutes, I'm willing to take a chance here, but I don't think Chris Paul is going to be balls out playoff Chris Paul and trying to prove himself here. But I'm not too interested in Phoenix. There will be a Phoenix player who will be really good. I just don't know which one.
Yeah, and I kind of have a similar issue with the Jazz side of the game where the Jazz, it looks like everybody's going to be playing for them tonight. Mike Conley has been ruled out. He sat last game. So the last game we had some of these guys off the bench, like Oni played 25 minutes. Jordan Clarkson ended up playing 22 minutes off the bench. Juwan Morgan played 21 minutes. I don't think the bench is going to get quite as much run in this game. They went really light with the starters in the last game where it was Bogdanovich played 17 minutes, Gobert played 17 minutes, Mitchell played 17 minutes, Ingles played 14. I expect those guys to be closer to the 18 to 20 minute range. And then I also think that kind of hurts some of the upside of the bench. So for me, the Jazz are a team that I don't really want to roster. Maybe people will gravitate towards some of those cheaper bench guys because of the workload they got last game. It's just hard for me to buy into that because I think the starters are probably going to play a little bit more extended minutes tonight. So how much do you think the Utah starters actually end up playing?
I tough for me to see anyone getting over that 24-minute mark, similar to, I believe, what I was saying for the Heat around that 24-minute mark. It's tough. I don't know. I'm gonna maybe take a few shots on Mitchell. When these star players get limited minutes, I tend to take a few shots on guys who I've seen have an upside and who can get me there, and Mitchell could potentially get me there. And I really don't like Utah. If you're people who are building multiple lineups, I think I'd be okay not having any Utah players just because there's so many other safer options on this slate. No one I really think can really break this slate. It's something I'm going to pay attention to news what Snyder says leading up to tip off. Just pay attention to our Slack and Twitter. That's how I feel right now. I don't feel too confident on the Jazz.
Yeah, I think they're probably my least favorite team to target for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think they're a little bit overpriced, much of the starters. And I just think they're going to run a deep bench where I think the playing time is going to be really spread out. We just have a few more minutes until we log off. So let's wrap with this. Overall favorite plays on the slate. Guy to pay up for me, it's going to be Giannis Antetokounmpo. I don't think that's anything like a hot take. I think everybody's going to be on board with that. If you can only pay up for one guy, it's going to be Giannis. He has the fairly secure minutes. We saw him play over 20 minutes last game, and he's by far the best permanent fantasy producer in the NBA. So Giannis for me. Do you agree with that? Or is there somebody more contrarian you would rather pay up for?
A payoff for besides Giannis would be tough on this slate, but I think I like the Pelicans. There's a chance one of the Pelicans players can outscore Giannis today. Like I said, I like Ingram, I like Zion, I like Lonzo. I'm riding aboard the Pelicans train today. I'm riding it hard, and we'll be sending Stan Van Gundy a long email if he's lying. So happy to see him back on the coaching sidelines. He was great in the booth. I really enjoyed him, but I just hope he doesn't lie to us today and we get to take advantage of it.
Hey, he's on Twitter, so you could be drunk tweeting at him later. You can get all your angry.
Do you think I'm producer Jordan, who's the lightweight out of the three, working the show today?
No.
Exactly.
British Jordan never. He's just over there taking drinks and walking around with a British accent. In terms of a value play for me, I really like Kendrick Nunn a lot in this spot. I mean, we look at the Heat with Jimmy Butler, Goran Dragic, and Andre Iguodala all out. I think that there is a little bit more usage to go around in that starting lineup than there would normally be. Kendrick Nunn is the cheaper of the decent fantasy producers in the Heat starting lineup, 5,100. I think that's a very viable price tag. I think we could probably see him play over 20 minutes at that kind of price. I think that he's worth going to. Any final thoughts you have before we sign off for the show?
No, hit that like button. I kept my word. Excited to do the show with you, Greg. We will be back Thursday. Sign up for Caruso. The Awesemo product for me personally was life-changing, and I hope it is for you. Take advantage of this promotion. Our NBA product is the greatest in the industry. Our projections are the greatest, ownership projections. Alex is working on some new tools that will be released by the time the NBA season tips off. Make sure to take advantage of it. Follow Awesemo NBA on Twitter, where the news from beat reporters will be tweeted out, and be part of our Slack. And good luck tonight. May the news be with you, and I hope to see you guys on top.
Absolutely. And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast network. Jordan, play the music out.